All right, I wanted to just say that I'm going to talk about alcohol and drug addiction. I'm listening to the topics here today, and it makes me think about how all the things we're talking about, homelessness, sex trafficking, abuse, in my mind, most of that is grounded in alcohol and drug abuse. In fact, I would argue that alcohol and drug abuse are probably the biggest problems we have in our society. I think more negative consequences come out of it than anything, and it's no respecter of color, no respecter of wealth or poverty. It affects everybody. It certainly affected me. If you don't believe in miracles, I'd like to tell you you're looking one. That I stand here clean and sober for 44 years is absolutely a miracle. At the age of 20, I'd flunked out of 3 colleges, been in trouble with the police since I was 15, was smoking marijuana, snorting cocaine, drinking every day, had no idea how to stop, had no desire to stop. I had no goals, no aspirations, other than to work just enough to get money for my addiction or either steal it. And I would steal from family, friends. I used to steal out of the church plate. When they'd say, hey, you get to take up the offering today, I'd say, great. And my friends and I would skim right out of it. That I'm standing here shows we certainly have a merciful God. So by 20, I was a failure in every sense of the word. And today I'm 66. Like I said, I've been sober. I've been married 46 years. I got 2 kids. I got 6 grandkids. I've owned and sold 2 businesses. I even taught school for 9 years. So they said, maybe you need to move on down the line. And then I've coached football for 20 years. So when, people talk about, well, I don't believe in God, man, you know what? I'm not going to talk to you about theology. How do you explain me? How do you can't argue with a changed life. It's not like I was 20. I woke up one morning and said, I think I'm just going to be good today. I mean, that was totally out of the question. I lived to party, to chase girls, to do drugs and drink. That was all I was interested in. And I would do anything or go run over anybody to get them. All the stuff you're talking about, abuse, selling drugs, crime, didn't matter. So when we look at alcohol and drug addiction, it's a pretty much accepted idea that it's a family disease. It's usually caused by genetics, traumatic events, mental illness, and family dysfunction. I know this is true as far as my family. My great-grandfather was an alcoholic, committed suicide. My father and his sister were alcoholics. 2 of my first cousins died of drug overdoses in their 20s and 30s. And sadly, this is not a blood relation, but my ex-son-in-law was killed in a car accident 6 years ago and left 3 of my grandsons without a father who I'm helping raise. And I thank God I'm alive and sober to help. But you know what? The wreckage you leave behind when you're a practicing alcoholic and drug addict is just unbelievable. I know I did. And, it has ramifications generationally. My story begins in Atlanta. I was born November 22nd, 1959. I think the reason my voice cracked so much is I wasted it yelling at Ian and all those guys that I coached for so many years. But you excuse me for that. I was born in Atlanta, like I said. I grew up in Doraville, Georgia. Been here. I've moved back and forth to some other cities, but finally settled here at age 12. My father was hardworking, but he was overbearing and distant. He worked and traveled most of my life. He was what we term a high-functioning alcoholic, which there are those. He knew how to keep his business going. He knew how to keep his family. We went to church on Sunday, but drinking and business were paramount. And I get it, man. Back then, you got to put food on the table. But I resented him. I didn't have a close relationship with him. And I blamed him for a lot of my issues once I started using and drinking. I was an only child. And it's interesting, though, when you age, you get knowledge, like you're talking about emotional. I realized he didn't know how to be a father. I mean, his father had to quit school in 8th grade and go to work because he was the oldest of 11 kids. And back then, they tell you, hey, man, your school days are over. You're 13. It's time for you to go to work, son. And so he didn't know how to be a dad because his dad didn't know how to be a dad. And so I think it's so important that we train these young men, especially men, how to be men. A man has to raise a man. And a sad thing is in our society, God bless you women, my mother was a great mom and she held the family together. Thank God she didn't drink, because if she had, I'd be serving life in prison right now, because I was a mad kid. I was angry. I was angry with him. I was angry with the world. But if you're a young man, you need to grow up to be a man. And that means if you have kids, you grow up, you take care of them. Doesn't matter how hard it is. Doesn't matter how tough it is. You got to be a man. And I wish someone had told me, well, they eventually did. But I see you young guys back at that table back there with some of you with your heads on the table. Sometimes the ones that need it the most to hear what I have to say want to be here the least. I get it, man. When I was your age, if my parents or somebody drugged me to this, I'd say, man, that's the last place I want to be. It's Saturday. I got to go to some unstoppable you conference. Man, I want to be drinking beer at the river and smoking weed and listening to Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin and sliding to Family Stone. But anyhow, I got off track. Whew. All right, anyhow, like I said, my father was a businessman. Back then, the 60s and 70s, if you were a businessman, you were probably drinking. You had to be out entertaining. 60s and 70s was when the drug culture hit America. So the parents were drinking, the kids were getting high, And so what's interesting is because I was an only child, I was raised as like a third adult. So I was drugged to business dinners and out to bars. And frankly, I loved it. I mean, I learned how to bet a point spread and learned how to play poker before I learned how to ride a bike. So I was like, let's go, man. This looks fun. Pretty waitresses, the tinkling glasses. I was like ready to go. So when I started drinking and using at age 14, I mean, I was hooked. I have never drank alcohol, what you would call socially or normally, my entire life. I don't have the predisposition to. I think if I went out here today, had a couple beers, I mean, I might relax a little, but I truly believe that I would be drunk and probably would have lost everything. And I mean, back then I didn't have $20 in my pocket. Now I've got an American Express card. I mean, I could do some serious damage quick. But anyhow, so, I did every drug imaginable. I don't need to go through the litany and the list of drugs. I drank every day. And what's sad is prior to my drinking, I'd been president of student council in junior high. I played football, I played basketball, I played baseball. I acted in plays, I made good grades. When I started using, boom, that was over. Flush it down the toilet. And that's the thing about it. If you're young and you say, I'm going to smoke a little weed, I'm going to drink a little whiskey, snort a little cocaine, well, now you might be dead because you might have fentanyl in it. You might be gone like that. One of my former players, God bless him, he went out one night, snorted some fentanyl. Great kid, he's dead. You're dead. It's over. Over. And I got a lot of friends, family members, like I said, that are dead. And so thank God I'm not. But anyhow, you just don't know where it's going to end. You might choose where to start, but you don't choose where to get off. And if you're an alcoholic, the Bible talks about being a slave to sin. That means if you're a slave, you don't choose when you're released. I mean, God will maybe release you. Maybe you'll hit bottom, but hey, you don't know. So I would suggest if you're young in here, don't start smoking weed. You know, weed is useless. The only thing weed did for me is it killed my ambition. It made me want to eat. It made me want to sleep. It made me want to sit there and just listen to music. It didn't do anything for me. Drinking, I mean, some people can socially drink, but what's the point? I mean, what's the point? I'm not saying I'm against people drinking. Both of my kids drink, but if you're got alcoholism in your family, just be warned. Be warned, because it's genetic. All right, so anyhow, like I said, I was a failure. You know, my high school, I don't know how I graduated. My last big thing I did in high school was I went down to the Bahamas, got in a brawl on my senior trip, got sent home, and that's the way most of my classmates remember me. It's like, hey, and you know what's sad? At 17, I knew I had a terrible problem, and I wanted to quit. I will say what's funny is that you talk about how God uses people. Here's the guy who was fighting on the senior trip, got sent home, used to get busted at school, and now I'm responsible for our 50th high school reunion, which is, you know, that's kind of a big joke. Like one of my old friends said, hey, I said, I know how to throw a party, I can promise you. But anyhow, you know, that usually involves the cops showing up and everything, but anyhow. So anyhow, here I am, 17, I know I got a problem, and I stayed sober for a whole week. I got back from the Bahamas, and the sad thing is I just didn't have any resources. I didn't know, I wanted to quit, I knew I had an issue, but I didn't really know who to reach out to. So just fast forward 3 years, and I'd hit rock bottom. That's when I'd flunked out of 3 colleges. I was just like, I gotta stop. And I was praying to God, please help me. Well, fortunately, one of my old running buddies had gone to AA and NA. And that's my table back there is AA and NA. I hope you buy a lot from the other vendors. I hope I don't get too many people coming to my table. But if you do have a problem or you know someone who has a problem, I mean, I'm here. I'm a resource. So anyhow, I went to my first AA and NA meeting in 1980. And that's where I met my wife. I actually met my wife in drug rehab, which is, I mean, it's funny. It's probably not the best place to go look for, you know, like you're talking about. I mean, but anyhow, she's been sober since she's 17. She got sober in 79. We've been married 46 years. Of course, the first 10 or 15 years were kind of like Ali and Frazier, but you know, I think our faith in the Lord is what always brought us through. I mean, we went through some serious struggles, but anyhow, my now wife got pregnant, and so we had a son she was 18 and I was 21. And I started bouncing in and out of the program because I was like, I wanted to run back to my bottle. It's like, oh, you got a family now. And I was, well, you know, I don't know how to deal with this. And so I went running back home, and thank God, you know, I had issues with my father, but thank God for my dad. I came back home after being married for about 3 months, and he's like, what are you doing here? And I said, well, you know, my marriage is not working out. And he said, well, listen, you got 2 choices. You can go back to your home because you're never coming back in this house. We're done with you. Or you can go find a bridge to sleep under. You got it? And I was like, oh, well, I think I'll go back to my apartment, you know. And the point of that is that that was brilliant because when you're dealing with an addict, I mean, there's so many families that love their addicted one to death. You got to make the addict make choices and to also own up to their actions. I mean, there's so many families just keep giving that. Well, he might die if I don't give him. Well, we're dying anyhow. I mean, you keep feeding an addict money. If you think they're going to go out there and, you know, go apply for a job, forget about it. I'm going to go down the corner and find my crack dealer. So again, if you have an addict in your family, don't co-sign on their BS. I mean, you got to hold them accountable, and that's a hard thing. But honestly, we're the greatest manipulators in the world. And so anyhow, the thing that I finally got sober February 5th, 1982, after a night of drinking, snorting cocaine, smoking weed, I end up at the foot of my son's crib. My pants are around my ankles. I'm covered in mud. I've thrown up outside. I'm a mess, and my son is looking over his crib. You know, I said, you're going to be just like your dad, or worse. I would have been worse. My dad could put food on the table. And that's when I prayed to God. I said, I got to stop. And thankfully, that was my last drinking drug, and that's been over, 44 years, yeah. I taught history, not math. But anyhow, you know, but what happened is when I went in the AA program, the AA program's based on 12 steps. The first one is that you are powerless over alcohol. You always will be. That you can never successfully use drugs or drink for the rest of my natural life unless you want to. It's like playing Russian roulette. And so the second thing you have to come to terms with is you're not a victim. Victims don't get sober. Victims actually don't do anything. I mean, if you see yourself as a victim, you're destined to a life of failure. I mean, that's how I thought. I thought the world owed me a living. I thought life was unfair. I thought people that were successful were either lucky or privileged or were doing something because they couldn't be. And really, the issue there was I had surrounded myself with losers. And so I had this mentality. But I finally had to look in the mirror and say, hey, baby, the reason you're a failure is because of you. I was selfish, I was entitled, I was lazy, and I didn't want to do anything. I wanted somebody to hand me life on a platter. And so what I did was I left my old friends. It's amazing, you young people, hey, if you got old friends that make fun of you for talking properly or doing well in school or not joining them in their criminal activity, forget about them. They're not your friends. Like when I stopped drinking, I didn't hang around with kids going to Michigan. I hung around with kids from Michigan who were importing cocaine in Atlanta. I mean, I hung around with dead-end losers. And so when I said, well, I'm going to get straight, oh man, you don't need that. You don't need to get straight, because what it was doing was shining a light on them. So, I had to get away from these failures. And, the alligators, they want you to crawl back into the pond when you start trying to take care of yourself. And so I had to get rid of my old friends and my old playmates. And I had to do work on myself and develop a relationship with God. And look at my defects. It doesn't matter how my dad treated me. It doesn't matter how society treats me. It's like you said, some people the Bible has some promises. One of them, baby, is that in this world, you're going to have trouble. I mean, that's a promise. But it says, be of good cheer. I have overcome the world, and I live in you, and so you can overcome the world. I mean, those are the facts. So for me to think that everybody's going to treat Alex with why? Well, of course, I hadn't done anything to earn any respect anyhow. And so anyhow, I started going to college. I graduated college in '84. Finally, I was on like the 7-year plan. How many of y'all have ever seen the movie Tommy Boy from about 30 years ago? Where Tommy Boy, he comes back and the guy says, are you a doctor? You've been in college for 7 years. I mean, it's like, no, I finally got out. But anyhow, what happened was, sorry, man. Anyhow, what's interesting is, people, because I'm an alcoholic, the only thing about me, I'm not different than anybody. I just can't drink normally. And so it's interesting, when I came out of college, and people will try to define you. They say, oh, you're black, or you're this, or you're poor, you're this or that. You can succeed. Don't let anybody try to define you and tell you what you can or can't do, ever. Because I had this interviewer, she told me, she said, I interviewed with her at this big company, and I told her my story of getting sober. And she goes, well, you just need to go get a job, like a low-level job at the government or something where you never have any stress, because you'll never be able to make it in the world. She goes, you're an ex-alcoholic, you'll just fold under the pressure. Of course, when she said get a government job, I said, what'd you have in mind, president? So, I could do that. I mean, anyhow. So, but I mean, I thought about her too, man. When I was out selling and I was out on the road, I said, you know what, I'm going to prove her wrong. And I thought about her too when I sold 2 businesses last year and retired. I said, and I didn't drink 44 years, man. So if somebody's negative with you, let them motivate you. I mean, I don't think you should go around with a chip on your shoulder, but which I had, but sometimes it's helpful. It's like, I'll show you, I've got God. I've got Almighty God on my side. You can't define me. And so it's interesting, at 42, I had this, it's like God gave me this notion. My kids, we had kids young. I said, you know what, I want to go back to college and teach and coach. Of course, a lot of my friends started thinking, you're a teacher? I mean, what a joke. I mean, when I told one of my friends, saw my mom at church and said, well, what's Alex doing now? Oh, he's teaching and coaching. And it's like my friend was like, what? He's teaching? Because I was so bad in school. But anyhow, I think one of the ways God has used me in my life is I've been able to, relate to kids. I've been able to relate to the bad kids. There aren't bad kids. There's kids that need love, affection, understanding. Sure, I mean, look, there's some kids that need to be held accountable. I needed to be held accountable. But when a teacher says, well, they're just a bad kid, I'm like, you've just written them off. Do your job. Invest in the kid. Get to know them. Find out where they're coming from. They might not have a parent. What's going on at their house? Just don't dismiss them because they don't want to, study, the French Revolution? I mean, what boy wants to study the French Revolution? I might like to start a revolution, but I don't want to study about it, It's ridiculous. But anyhow, so, God has been able to use me. Like I said, I retired. And I'm still coaching. Sadly, like I said, my grandsons lost their father. So I'm helping raise 3 teenage boys. And man, let me tell you, the acorn doesn't fall far from the tree. So it's funny when I start thinking, well, at least they're not as bad as I was, as if that's some comfort. But you see, God is using me in the lives, and He's taken my failures. And believe me, I think back, I regret not playing ball. I loved athletics, and it still haunts me. I think, man, I threw my whole youth away on drugs and alcohol. God, I wish I would have stayed with sports. I love sports. But you know what? That was a decision I made. But that being said, I'm able to pour back into these young people today and take my defeat and even my weaknesses and hopefully encourage them. And so, I just want to, it's funny, I wrote this speech. I didn't look at it, but I think I followed it to some degree. But I want to thank y'all for allowing me to be here. And I just want to encourage anyone, if you think you have a problem, if you have a relative that has a problem, if you would just like to learn more about alcoholism, drug addiction, I'm here. And last thing I'm going to say, I see myself as a double winner. I'm saved by the blood of Jesus, and I'm sane and sober. So thank you.